Welcome to Oregon Indie Film, a video podcast that shines the light on Oregon's independent film industry. I'm your host, Dawn Sellers. I interview Oregon's independent filmmakers who offer insights into the creative process, challenges, and triumphs of making movies in Oregon. On this episode, I chat with filmmaker Eric Delehoy. Eric is a writer, cultural organizer, and powerful advocate for LGBTQ+ representation, on the page, in politics, and beyond. He holds an MFA in creative writing, fiction from Antioch University in Los Angeles. We chat about Eric's work and his feature film, Winters, Nebraska. The film tells the story of Jack, a 35-year-old gay man who returns to his hometown in rural Nebraska following an extended absence in San Francisco and the death of his partner. Upon returning home, Jack must not only deal with the weight of his grief, he must also confront the strained relationships within his family. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Eric Delehoy. All right. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm here today with Eric Delehoy, writer, director, producer of Winters, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And you're having your Portland premiere at the Tomorrow Theater coming up on June 24th.
That's right. Just a little over 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, we'll just start off by having you tell us, you have an interesting background. You've done a lot of different things other than filmmaking, but kind of tell us who you are and what you do.
Who am I?
Always the big question.
The hardest question to begin with. I think at the core of everything, what I've learned, especially as I've gotten older, is that regardless of what I've done, I've always been a storyteller. Whether it was when I ran for office a few years ago, whether it's, working with my students and helping them to understand college process and helping them to tell their stories, to, writing stories when I was a little kid. And I eventually got my master's of fine arts and creative writing in 2004. And I always thought I think I've always been so interested in the stories of other people and the connective value of understanding people through their stories and their experiences. I find people really interesting and fascinating, and especially when folks are really super unique or unusual. I always find that really exciting to explore. And so I think that, honestly, just at the core of it, as you get older, as you look at how your life experiences have come together, it's really been that of a storyteller, no matter what, medium I've used. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And everyone has a story.
Absolutely.
Everyone, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
For sure. So you're not from Portland?
No.
No. Where do you call home?
Portland is definitely home, and I think actually my grandparents are from Portland. My great-grandparents also, but I don't have any family that I know of left here. My mother and her mom and my uncle moved from Portland when my mom was 16, and I envision it very much like the movie Mermaids with Cher, and my grandmother was quite the character. Always had different colored hair. Every time I saw her, when things got tough, she would usually up and leave, and that's what happened. And so, but my grandfather comes from Vernonia. He was a race car driver. Oh, wow. He was actually the first fatality at Daytona Beach, before I was ever around. But we're actually doppelgangers,
really?
Which is really very strange. Yeah, so that might be a movie in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, that could be for sure. And so you're from Colorado, though.
Correct. Yeah, I grew up in Colorado in a small town called LaPorte. And our claim to fame is that we were one vote shy of becoming the state capital in Colorado.
Oh. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So instead of being in this larger city, I grew up in this small town, which was a wonderful place to grow up. And I always call my upbringing kind of rural adjacent. My grandparents had a small farm. We lived next to them for my first 5 years. And then when I was a senior in high school, we moved back into the big house. And then my grandparents lived next door. And I live next to Fort Collins, Colorado, which is about an hour north of Denver. And while I had, that more, mid-sized city, to grow up near, I really loved the open spaces and really, I think, grew up with that farming mentality that my grandparents had and their parents before them. And most of my ancestors, I believe, were farmers. And,
yeah. So Portland is a good mix of that, right? It's, that city, but also not a big city.
Well, I think that what drew me most to Portland when I moved here in 2002 was politically it was better aligned, for, a gay couple moving. But I think that more than that, what I've learned is that Portland is just a place of authenticity in its many, many incantations. And so I love the fact that people can kind of, just be here. But I also love being surrounded by the beauty of, the natural world, I really don't think I've ever lived in a non-beautiful place in my life.
Yeah, why would you, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, Oregon is definitely fits the bill with all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you first know that you wanted to make a film or be a filmmaker?
Wow.
Because you have other careers.
Correct. Yeah. I think that I think I probably have always known in some sense that I wanted to tell stories. My first film that I made was actually with a Super 8 film. I was so enamored with old shows like Big Valley, Barbara Stanwyck, and Little House on the Prairie, all these little things you watched in the 70s. And but I think my interest in film really took off when Star Wars came along.
Oh, okay.
I was definitely a Star Wars kid in that imagination, and I really loved science fiction a lot. And in fact, when Battlestar Galactica came out, I used to. My dad was a shop teacher in high school, and so we'd always get these wood scraps, and I would be able to use the bandsaw to make spaceships, things like that. And I really loved these science fiction movies like Battlestar Galactica, things like that, where people were always, they had survived something horrific, but then were moving towards something better. And I remember there used to be a show on, I think it was Nickelodeon, that Leonard Nimoy did about science fiction and how to make, starships out of old shampoo bottles and things like that.
Gosh,
and I would get communion cups from church, and I would paste them on the back to be like the exhaust and all of that stuff. And so, and I made a Super 8 movie at that point. And I painted the background, and I put stars, there, and then I put all these ships, and I used the communion cups that were see-through to kind of give some, height to the ships. And I learned to take the camera, and I would basically zoom in a little bit and then zoom out quickly and then lift it up like it was going into hyperspace. And so I made that movie, and then another one called Tornado, where I threw a bunch of bins at a shed. But I think I always liked that version. And I think I didn't write my first full-length screenplay until I was in middle school. And I fell in love with this science fiction series called V. And V was about these aliens who came, to the world, under the guise of peace, and they ended up being like lizard people underneath. They looked like us, but they were actually lizard people underneath their skins. And I really loved that environment, but it also was very much about the rise of fascism and how easy that can happen. And so I liked those elements, and I wrote something called V Teen Crisis. And it was all from these teenagers' point of view and how they were part of the resistance and all that stuff. And it was pretty hardcore, cutting edge at that time. It dealt with divorce and teen pregnancy and drug use and all of this stuff. And I'm, 14, and I wrote it.
Wow.
And I would have movie practice in my basement. Never made the film.
Yeah.
And for years and years and years, I would have a dream that I was still working on that film, but I never finished it. Now that I've finished some films, I don't dream about that anymore.
Wow.
So I think it's just one of the things that kind of set it in motion.
Yeah. Do you still have your Super 8 films?
I do, yeah. Well, I would say my mom does, in the Super 8 box, but they are still there.
I love it. That's great. You talk a lot about on your website about the intersection of art and activism, and you were involved in politics for a while. So, can you tell us about how you navigate that intersection using film for activism, or does activism influence your filmmaking? I guess
I was actually thinking about that on the way over a little bit. And thinking about how when we write a film, we don't really know, where it's going to take us. And I think when you write a story, you don't necessarily place the activism within a story, right? If you tell a story, though, that's authentic with the characters and the situation, I think it innately, depending on the subject matter, becomes political. As a queer person, the personal is political for me. It always has been, right. I've never had a day where, I've just been able to walk through life without thinking about it. Right. And I think, there are lots of folks who find themselves in the, category of other, that, do the same. Right. And so it's a whole extra level that you don't necessarily get to experience full authenticity because you're always having to push back or take in or guard. And so, I think for me, the activism comes out of, again, like putting together that authentic story, which allows those characters to be relatable to the people that watch it. So Winters is very much like it's basically about a man, mid-30s man who goes back home after having, escaped to San Francisco many years earlier, 16 years earlier. And he's coming back, this gay man, to a place that no longer feels like home, that is not bothered in terms of his family, not bothered to really understand who he is. And so I think that the elements within Winters, the understanding the face value of someone and their experience and the being able to sit down and actually listen is something that we don't do a lot of anymore. And so that in itself, I think, allows for change or, social change without the legislative aspect of it. And I think when I ran for office, I found that really that was pretty much the most inauthentic place I could have found myself. Yeah. But it brought me back to storytelling, which brought me to the most authentic space. And and I think, we've had a couple screenings and, it's been quite moving, honestly, to hear, stories of kids coming out, or especially trans kids who've come and seen, the show and how they relate, even though, my character is not a trans person, how they relate to that, not feeling part of their family, not feeling part of that greater, part of society, and not being able to be fully themselves. And I think this whole story is really about Jack figuring out how to fully be himself that late in life. And so that's where the political part comes from. The activism is just not holding back and telling a story. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called The Celluloid Closet, but it's a really great documentary back in the 90s about portrayal of queer folks, in film. And usually it's been tragedy, or usually it's been some kind of stereotype, or it's the gay guy, or, the Jack Tripper faux gay guy to get the laughs. And it's not really been until fairly recently that we are starting to see a really honest portrayal of just people eating dinner. Right. And so that's my hope, is that, people can see this and realize, wow, all this kid wants here, this 30-some-year-old kid who still feels like a kid, right? 30-year-old man who feels like a kid just wants to be part of something, and I think that's where the underlying activism comes from, is just the relational aspects, I think, of the stories that I want to tell. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, film can do that. Stories can do that because people connect with them and see themselves a lot of times, like you said.
Right.
So your original inspiration for Winters in Nebraska, can you pinpoint that, or was it just a general theme that you wanted to get across?
It's so funny because it's actually a really old story. So Winters started out as a novel that I worked on in graduate school in 2002 to 2004. And when I was applying for graduate schools, I had to submit a couple, I think it was like 20 pages or something. And I had other work that I could submit, but I just kind of sat down and started thinking about the time that I had spent in Nebraska. So I lived in Nebraska for a little over a year, followed a boy up there stupidly, but actually not stupidly, because had I not, none of this would have happened.
Right.
And I met really great people there, and I just loved Scottsbluff. That's where I lived, and Scottsbluff becomes Winters, in the film. And so it actually was a novel for a long time. And I got 85% of the way to the finish line on the novel, graduated in 2004, made it about 5% more to the finish line, but never completed. And after I ran for office, what I loved about running for office was meeting people and talking to them, and hearing their stories and really connecting on that human level. And I don't know what it was. I spent time with a friend at a conference who had made a couple movies. He's, an independent film actor. And I got on the plane and I'm like, I knew that I wanted to write again, and my creativity I'd kind of stuffed down for a long time with life. And I was on this plane, and suddenly I'm like, it's a movie. And so I actually taught myself, that was 3 years ago last month.
Wow.
And so I sat down and taught myself how to write a screenplay and came up with all that. So the genesis really came from an older story. But I think it came from emotional elements in my own life. It's not, autobiographical by any means, but the emotional elements are.
Yeah.
And I think those levels and so those have always been with me. And so they all just kind of converged about 3 years ago. And since then, it's just
you've sort of taken off. So Winters, Nebraska is your first feature film.
Correct.
But you've made other films that have done very well.
Yeah.
So your first short film was Cowboy Boots.
Yes.
Which has won several awards and screened at, 75 festivals.
I think so.
Or
something like that.
Crazy number. Yeah. That's fantastic.
It's been a ride for sure. Yeah.
And that's including, best short, best queer short, along with best actor nods to the lead, Michael Ridley, and also the co-lead, Evan. So shout out to Evan, who I know is going to listen to this or watch this podcast.
Hi, Evan.
Hi, Evan. And then your second short film is just starting the festival run now, and that's called State Rep.
Correct.
And it's sort of a dark comedy. So how was the leap from these successful short films into making this feature film? I mean, you knew you wanted to make this film.
Right, yeah.
What was that like for you?
Well, when I wrote the screenplay, so I actually wrote the screenplay for Winters before either of those two short films. And my neighbor at the time, Jamie Goodwick, who was the cinematographer or the DP on my short film, Cowboy Boots, I knew he did that work. And so I wanted to know, well, what's it going to cost to make something like this? Now that I have my baby, I can't just hand it over to somebody, right? Like I have to tell my story the way I want to tell it. And so I sat down, I told him about this, and he's like, Eric, slow down. He's like, maybe you should try something shorter, And so at the time, I went back, I looked at the novel, and Cowboy Boots was a chapter from the novel that I'd written that had been published by Instant City, which was a lit mag in San Francisco in 2005. And so we decided to do that. That was a huge learning experience, just doing that first film and not having gone to film school. I love movies. I love visuals, but I think, Jamie was fantastic in being a great, tutor for me. I think of other folks who were on the set as well, who really, Michael Ridley, who was the lead, really helped me on the actor side of things. Like, it was a really great collaborative effort that really made me feel very at home and comfortable within the medium right away. Even though I didn't know what I was doing, it just felt like home. But I always knew that this was preparation for the big one. And I did State Rep, honestly, just to get a little bit more directorial experience before we went into the feature, because I had a lot of hand-holding, and if you've seen, Cowboy Boots, Cowboy Boots has very little dialogue.
Yeah.
And so the directing aspects of that were not that challenging, I think, in terms of, dialogue and characters and that piece. It was more of a visual in general. And so state rep was a different experience that helped me with that. I think it was actually, I was asked this question in Fort Collins because we showed the film there a few weeks ago. I felt like preparing for the shorts was harder than preparing for the feature. But I'm also a planner and I'm super organized, things like that. And honestly, it just had been going on for such a good period of time. Now, honestly, there were some things that helped me with that. I had an angel, who was able to invest a good amount of money, so I didn't have to spend as much time raising funds.
That helps.
It really did. And I knew people in the area where we were going to shoot. So, I knew where the locations were. And basically, if I needed anything in Pine Bluffs, I just had to talk to my friend Matt's mother. She had a key to every building in Pine Bluffs. Pine Bluffs is like, population 900. It's different than filming in Portland where you've got to get this, permit if you want 2 seconds on the sidewalk and everything else, and it costs you thousands of dollars. Whereas, in Pine Bluffs, I remember calling up the town of Pine Bluffs number. And I said, this is going to sound really weird, but we're making a film in Pine Bluffs and I need to see what it takes to, film something in the cemetery. And like, and I cannot remember the woman's name. We're just going to call her Lenore. It's totally not Lenore though. But it's a good Midwest name. And so I'm like, and she's like, and I'm like, who do I talk to? And she said, well, that's me.
Of course.
And I'm like, okay, well, do you have a permitting process? How does this work? And she's like, no, you can have it. Just let us know like 2 days ahead of time so we don't call, the police and you're,
when you're filming
and that's how it went,
cemetery.
And so from that perspective, we didn't have to do a lot of, the permitting process. There were things we had to do, like we filmed in the national park, Scottsbluff National Monument, on the top of that. So we had to fill out that paperwork, things like that. But, I love casting, so for me that was a real joy, and Michael helped me with the whole thing, so we got to have everyone read with him, which helped with our chemistry.
Yes.
And I, meeting Michael was really great because of him. Then he connected me with our director of photography, Bruce James Bales, who actually was just honored. He's going to be the keynote speaker at the Iowa Filmmakers annual conference this year. It's like the 37th annual. And he's fantastic. He's out of Des Moines, and he brought his whole crew with him.
Wow.
So I was able to not have to, piece together a crew. It was a bunch of men and women who had worked together a lot.
That helps.
It really did. And so it made it smooth. So I think, the paperwork with SAG was a challenge, it was like, and we wanted to do it correctly, but it seemed like, it was hard, I think, as a really small film. It seems like SAG still needs to kind of figure out how to work with really like moderate or micro budgets in a way that encourages smaller films to do that, right? And we did, which was good. But it was a challenge to understand that because, when you have a budget of $350,000, you don't really have an attorney, who can go do all of that stuff. And so learning that, but
I feel like once you do that paperwork the first time,
and now you know what to do.
Sense,
but oh my God, like it was just like, I don't know how to do this. And luckily, I had a producer who helped in LA, was one of our producers, from that. But I think that it was just so much fun, and everyone was so excited about the project that I could let go of control, and I think that's kind of like the biggest advice I could give anyone working in film is you've got to let go of your ego and let go of control and understand that, they know what they're doing. Just let them do that.
Exactly.
And
I think that's great advice.
That worked really well.
Yeah. I mean, the project takes on a life of its own.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't be precious about that.
No.
It's your story. You've written it. You know what it's supposed to be. But when you allow other people to contribute, I think the project becomes way better than you ever could have imagined.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of give them this canvas and they can really paint it, you know, outside of the lines, you know, and make it more beautiful. I just think about how, like, when we filmed Winters, we filmed it a year ago last month. It was the entire month of May, basically, which you never know what's going to happen on the Great Plains in May, you know, other than in Wyoming. Well, anywhere, I suppose, anywhere these days. But, you know, all I know about Wyoming, having, you know, grown up really close to Wyoming, is that it's really windy.
Yes.
A lot of time, especially in the spring.
Which is challenging for film.
Yeah. We had to really be nimble. You know, it was raining. They had experienced a drought, you know, and of course it rains and we're there. But it actually gave us a great shot for a storm scene that we needed, you know. Nice. But there's a scene in the film that's kind of the penultimate scene, right? It's where Jack, the protagonist, and finally has the conversation that he needs to have with his mother, you know, and it's near the end of the film. And originally I wrote it to take place in front of this big, you know, Midwestern house, big farmhouse, while she's planting, you know, in front. And it was so windy, we couldn't put up the sail, right? We couldn't put any equipment up, anything like that. And so it forced us to have to think about a new location. Instead, we set it inside this old barn. And the atmosphere that barn created for us, and the colors and the textures and just the feel of it, made the scene so much more powerful, you know, and we had to change, you know, some things like that, you know, and it allows your film to really, I don't know, I think if you have a good film, it really does take on its own life, and you don't know what it's going to be at the end. Right. And that's the magic that I think I love so much about it. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. So you gathered a lot of people from Portland, and packed them up and took them to Nebraska. So you had this film crew that was there, that came there, and then you took everyone from Portland. So tell me what that was like.
It's almost like, I will probably, so I'm working on another film that I want to film in the same location, because I just fell in love with, you know, this town, everyone fell in love with this town and the people there. I think, you know, bringing folks from Portland, so we had our hair and makeup person, our wardrobe, our costume designer was phenomenal. Tracy, who we all know and love. And you know, was from here. And I actually drove out in this huge rental car. It was like this, I don't know, driving a spaceship across, you know, it was humongous, but it was packed, you know, window to window, you know, seat to ceiling with all of our props, all the wardrobe. We couldn't even see out the back.
Oh my gosh.
And me and Taylor Stump, who you probably also know, we drove together. And for me, the driving into the film was a really cool experience, because I think it allowed me the headspace to not be rushing through the airport, to not be worrying about luggage or anything like that, but just to drive in. And we drove through like really super rural areas. And I really loved that experience. And so, but bringing folks that I trusted, who had worked on both of those, you know, short films with me. So I don't even know what Taylor's job is, frankly. Like Taylor does everything. Exactly. Yeah. And so I just called Taylor like the Eric Whisperer, because she's so good at keeping me calm, but also noticing things. And like if I noticed something, I wouldn't say anything, but she'd be like, hey, you know, I think this is going on. And it was great. And then you'll just see these little pieces that Taylor like places, you know, in the frame, you know, whether it's a photograph or a painting of two birds, you know, or this or that, just knows how to dress a set, can do everything. And I think that was fantastic. And so, and then we had several actors, you know, from here as well. And so I think that was really nice, because there were folks who came, you know, to production that I didn't know, you know, like some of our actors, and I didn't know anyone on crew other than our AD Marissa Vaughn and our DP Bruce. But they were people that I trusted, and so I knew whoever they would choose would be great. Right. And so from that perspective, I didn't feel like, okay, we're walking into a big disaster or anything. It was so exciting to finally be at that moment.
You went into the project with a level of trust.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so true about Oregon filmmakers, is that everyone works together.
They
and
do.
You work with people that you trust, and there's so many great people.
It's a wonderful community.
Yeah. And so how long did it take you to film? Like, how many shoot days did you have?
We did 18 shoot days.
And was that all in a row? So
no, we had we had 2 weekends where we did 6 day off, 6, 2 days off, and then 6. From there. And so, but in some cases, like one of the days was a lot of B-roll.
Right.
We had a few days that were closer to half days, but I think the hardest was we had a company move. So we filmed 2 weeks in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, and a couple smaller areas, Albin, Wyoming, which is where this little church is that I loved, and the Antelope truck stop, in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
But then after we did this pond scene, we moved up to Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and that was challenging because we had to figure out, we went from all being in the same motel or hotel, which was really wonderful to be together, to being in Airbnbs because it was less expensive, and it was more budget conscious. But what that did, it wasn't a disaster, but we suddenly went from being this super cohesive family to not seeing each other at every meal. And so that taught me a lot about what I want to do next time.
Right.
But the move was a real challenge for everybody. We had to move everyone around at the last minute because of who had cars and not. And so, but I don't know, ultimately, it was just, production was great. And we were able to roll with the punches and be really nimble. And that honestly just made it really successful. I never for a moment felt like, oh, we're not going to have something good here. It just felt like it was right.
Yeah. Hey there. If you're enjoying this episode of Oregon Indie Film, don't go anywhere. We've got more great conversation coming up. And if you believe in uplifting local voices and the power of independent storytelling, we'd love your support. Hit that follow button, share the show with a friend, or leave us a quick 5-star review. It makes a big difference. Want to get more involved? Reach out at OregonIndieFilm@gmail.com. Now, back to the episode. Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about the challenges. Is there one that really stands out, something that you really had to overcome?
Yeah, there was... So I wrote, the story came from Scottsbluff and my time there. What I loved about Scottsbluff is that it was strange because we're in the middle of, red Nebraska, and I was as a, 26-year-old, gay man, but I lived in a house that had 2 other gay men, in the apartments and things like that. And, we would play volleyball 5 nights a week and, and I don't know, I never seemed to have an issue or a problem, there. But I think that things were different then than they are now in these places. It wasn't so politically charged,
right?
And so. But I used to, when I was there, I would read a book, every couple days, and I would go up to the top of this bluff. Scottsbluff National Monument is absolutely beautiful. It was the main monument that people on the westward expansion trails would see, before they started to go up the Laramie River, or the Platte River, toward the Laramie River, and then head up to the Rockies as they were headed to Oregon. But also it was the Mormon Trail in particular. And so this was not just this beautiful monument, but it had so much to do with westward expansion and trying to find places to be yourself. And I found that really inspiring. And so I wrote one of the scenes in chapters in my book that I wrote pretty early on was up on top of the bluff. And it's where the farmhand who happens to be gay, is kind of replaces Jack, when he went to San Francisco, and Jack, it's after this fundraiser, and they're kind of like just drinking some, whiskey like on the top of this bluff and having this great conversation. And so, I've always had this with a certain thing in mind behind me, the foliage,
Right.
that at night can be really interesting. And we got all the permits for it. So when we went up to location scout with the DP and looked at everything, the monument was closed. So for repaving, and we couldn't go up there. So the day before we were going to shoot, he's like, okay, we've got some time. Let's go up and scout this out. So I know where we're going to set things. And we realize, oops, the first tunnel is too small for our equipment van to get through. And I'm still thinking, okay, I have to have the scene up here.
Right.
I have to, like, this whole bluff is so like beautiful and it has to be used and things like that. And I also had another like sunrise scene that's shot from there. And I was and when the DP's like, we can't move the equipment that far out. We can't do this. And we're already like only like 4 or 5 days left to shoot. So we're all tired,
Right.
And I'm just like, really like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And so I'm trying to figure this out. And, we're like, well, we could just film it in the parking lot here. I'm like, no, we can't. I don't want any traces of a lot. This needs to be away. They're two gay men who need to be away versus, in a place, this rural area. And so it was a really hard drive back because I'm trying to process. The DP is trying to, Bruce is trying to come up with all these solutions. And I'm just like, I just need
to fix it. Yeah.
I just needed a little bit of time and space. And it was a little bit not our best day together. But it actually, I was like, wait, we're not going to film. We can move this other scene to the picnic table shelter instead of in front of this beautiful river, which is in front of the bluff. And since Scotts Bluff is like, we don't care what you do.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, great. We're going to film next to the river. And it actually created this much more beautiful scene and this intimacy. And then you get the water behind and this just beautiful green that's kind of lit up. And so it actually ended up being fine. But it was really challenging for me to take something that to me was one of the first times that Jack connected with someone, and I felt like it needed to be in that right place, right? And it's like, no, I'm not going to put this in a park. Even though no one would know it was in a parking lot, I knew.
You would know.
And that was not the vision. And so that was the hardest part for me. But then we got this incredibly gorgeous sunrise scene still, out of it that was absolutely stunning. I think you all know Suzanne Owens Duvall.
Yes.
Yeah, she plays the grandmother in this, and I got my grandmother back for the shoot, which was wonderful. She was just saying like that none of it was acting at that point when she just saw what she saw in front of her.
That's great.
And it just was a really very moving day for us from there. But, those challenges happen, and I think you have to expect that you don't know what they're going to be, and you just have to be good, like, okay, how can you put your heads together and figure out how to solve this? Because we don't have the luxury of adding one more day on here.
No.
One more day is $10,000 minimally.
Yeah.
And when you have the budget that we had,
You're already tight.
We were fortunate to have that kind of budget.
Yeah.
And it's not a small amount of money, don't get me wrong. But,
it's never
we
enough,
could not
though.
have that. I could not add another extra 10 grand on because of that. Just couldn't.
Well, and all those forks in the path, they really do become part of the process.
They do, yeah.
And sometimes for the better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
You learn
I think
from
so.
them.
Absolutely.
If they're not for the better, you still learn from them.
Definitely.
Yeah. And we've already talked a little bit about your budget and your fundraising. So anything specific that you'd like to share about how you came up with the money or, how did you come up with that budget?
Well, I think that so it was really nice is that Jamie, who is the DP for Cowboy Boots, really helped me in thinking about budget, you know?
Good.
And so I took basically the model that we had for the short film and then just kind of extrapolated from that. And then I worked with, Bruce in saying, you know, like, because it's different, like so the nice thing about filming, you know, in the Midwest is that it doesn't cost as much.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, I was able to understand and we paid well, which is nice. Like we paid our crew quite well. We paid our actors well. In fact, we had over 3,000 people submit for 5 roles.
Wow.
And that was just phenomenal, you know? And so I'm really proud that we paid everyone well.
Yeah,
you
that feels good.
It does.
And I think it makes everyone else feel good too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, you know, I am a believer that if you treat your cast and crew well, it's going to come across in the film.
It absolutely does.
I really believe that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So I was able to just kind of extrapolate a little bit from that. There were some things that I didn't understand. I'm like, what's a line producer? you need a line producer. I'm like, I don't know what that is. So I relied on Marissa Vaughn, who she's out of LA and she DPs for a whole bunch of, you know, things, and that's her real job. And excuse me. And so she helped me understand like what a line producer does, how much we would pay for that. You know, we had to get an intimacy coordinator, right. So lining those folks up from there. But, you know, and then it was just like figuring out, like I remember budgeting like brought me to tears a couple times because I'm like, okay, I've got $350, right? And I was like, okay, I know that we need $250 to get us through the shoot. And so I had this whole, like, I was really proud of this spreadsheet that I put together of all the hotel nights and who was going to be there and added it all up. And then I realized I didn't include the crew. And I was like, oh my God, that's another $15,000. And then it's like, okay, what can we cut here? What can we do here? And all this kind of stuff. And it actually did work out because I was super proud. I'm like, oh, I'm only at $325.
I have all this extra money.
You know, we're going to be fine. And then it was like, no. And we ended up actually being pretty close to budget.
Good.
I really haven't done the final number. Well, because you're always still working, right? Right. But, you know, I think we came in at still just under 370. So that's not bad.
That's not bad. Yeah, that's really good. And so you are premiering this film, as we mentioned, Tomorrow Theater on June 24th. Now, as distribution channels, we know are evolving, changing, have changed. How are you approaching distribution? What's your plan for that?
So we can't technically call it's a special screening. It's not a premiere.
Exactly.
Yeah. Special screening.
Special screening, yeah.
You know, we've had a lot of discussions. I don't know if you know who Ryan Graves is.
Yes.
Yeah. So Ryan was the colorist for my first 2 films, and he's helped
Ryan's
with
fantastic.
Very much so. And he's got a lot of great industry experience. Yes. And so I had really good conversations with him. I had good conversations with Michael as well. Michael's been I wanted to give him a producer credit, but he won't take it, you know, in the film. So, Michael, you get it on here. But in any case, we've had these discussions, and it's like we're doing this. Our goal is to do a limited festival kind of release. With short films, you know, I think festivals are great because you just get it out there. Right. But with a feature, you know, if your film is selected, they expect you to be there. Yes. You know,
which can be very expensive.
Which you pay for, you know, and then you want to bring someone else along, whether it's the DP or one of the actors. So then that's double the expense. Typically, most festivals don't, you know, give any kind of honorarium to help with that. You know, they might put you up in someone's basement or something, you know, but like it's expensive and, you know, and you just continue to hemorrhage money when you actually want to start making a little bit to pay off, you know, some of the things that you know, put in Hawk. Yeah. Exactly. But what we're looking at are some really specific festivals, you know, in the Midwest that have a little bit more of a name, or especially like regionally, you know, things like, although it also depends on a lot of them now we're at their final deadline, and then it's like, well, you know, is it worth it to submit?
To pay the extra money because it's the late deadline,
so, you know, my job now is to reach out to the organizers and say, hey, you know, I don't want to pay $100 if you have your full setup here, but if you would seriously look at something, I would be happy to send it. But we have a list of those. We're going to look at, I think the film actually would do quite well in the UK and in Ireland. And so we're going to hit more festivals there because we're not showing it all in this area. And then I'm also taking a look at festivals that aren't requiring us to be their premiere.
Oh, okay.
You know, some will be a premiere, like
Only
if you look at,
few really do
they
that.
don't too much anymore.
Yeah.
But like Heartland, for example, in Indianapolis is one that I would really love to, get into. You just have to be the Indiana premiere, right?
Right.
So our
Austin,
plan,
you have to be the Texas premiere.
Correct.
They like
Yeah,
for you
correct.
to be the Texas premiere.
Exactly. So, and then we'll hit a few queer festivals, but we don't want to just pigeonhole it as a queer film. It's obviously a queer film, but it's bigger than that, and it needs to go to audiences, honestly, that aren't the choir.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so what our plan is, and I'm so excited, we'll be really putting this together, is that we're going to focus on doing 2 kind of like tours in the fall just to kind of get out there. We're going to do one on the western slope of Colorado, probably start into the I-70 corridor a little bit. We are going to target independent theaters. Also, some arts organizations. Grand Mesa has a really cool, in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, has a small arts center that says, hey, when you're featured, we'll be happy to maybe show that.
I love that. Some unexpected places.
Yeah, and universities. And I have the possibility of a couple universities in Colorado on the western slope that would show it. So really like being diverse about or diversifying our portfolio, I guess, in that way, and thinking of ways to raise funds and also get it out there to a really great different groups of folks. So that way, then when we start to, so our plan is a theatrical release in the spring of next year. So then we can then really market it based on testimonials from these theaters, from the art centers and all that stuff.
That's smart.
Then we'll seek distribution at that point. As you know, it's very rare. I mean, who knows? If A24 calls me tomorrow,
you're going to say yes.
Says, I'm going to be like, okay, fine.
Well, you're going to say how much first.
How much. But also, are you going to, can we release this in theaters? Because, a lot of films end up going directly into streaming.
And that isn't what we want as filmmakers.
No. It has to be seen on the big screen.
Right.
And so...
especially with a film like this.
Yes.
Where, this, again, the intersection of art and activism, you want people to see it and experience it with other people.
Yes.
Not on their sofa at home.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I think that, that's something that... is so beautiful about cinema, right?
Yes.
Is the community that it creates. And this is another thing I was thinking about on the way over here, was that we don't see films like this as much anymore, right? Like, it's like nothing against Marvel and all that stuff, but it seems like all we see is the same Marvel movie, good versus bad, and these archetypes and this, superhuman abilities and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, can we just show something that's real, that shows the resilience and the fortitude and the depth of character that real human beings can have? And I think people who go to independent theaters crave that so much.
They do.
And so
it's
that's
the beauty
our
of
niche.
indie film.
And that's our market.
Yeah, exactly. That's what independent film does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it tells the stories that are not already told. I mean,
Correct.
By the people who should be telling them.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that. So I always like to ask this question of everyone, and I'm excited to hear what your answer is, because I'm sure that you have a big, beautiful dream. So what, if it could be anything, if you could do anything, money, time, not an object, what is your big, beautiful dream for yourself? Doesn't have to be film related. It can be anything. On the spot. I always like to put my guests on the spot.
I mean, okay, so I'm not a binary person in my response, nor are any of us really. I would travel the world, number one.
Yeah.
And then I would make a film a year.
Okay.
So I would do both. Like I would, I think that I have several, I was so worried when I finished this film that I wouldn't have anything left to say.
Yeah.
Especially a film that's just so close and so emotional, and would it ever be as good, or as close? And this other one's taken off already. I've got 2 more in the back of my head and in these, and then suddenly, I'm discovering things about my family's ancestry. I'm like, wow, that could be a really interesting, film. And I think that for me, I would love to travel with the film. Yeah. And I would love to take it places where we don't have to get any money for it, like to be able to, I think there's nothing better than a good talk back, and the things that people take from what you make is so moving, and so we had there've been a couple versions of our final film. As you see things and you're like, let's fix this before it really goes out to the world. And we had a first screening in North Bend, Washington, a little over a month ago at this tiny little theater up there. And it was great. And there was, maybe 25 people in the audience. But in a sense, it was kind of like, it was a very queer audience because it was a queer film festival. And, one of the things someone said, the minute I heard it was Nebraska, I felt like no way would they get Nebraska. Yeah. No way would they be able to authentically show Nebraska. And then she said, but the moment you brought Runza in, I knew you got Nebraska. And Runza is this restaurant, fast food chain that started in Nebraska that everyone in Nebraska knows about, Wow. And so, but I don't know, just this connection that people are having, or they're suddenly like, I didn't realize that this could happen here, or wow, how difficult this could be. But, I don't know. It was just, I love the connection that these things create.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I have to give Nebraska another chance because I've been there a couple of times and I really have no desire. I had no desire to go back, but now hearing you talk about it and, seeing clips from the film, it's like, okay, maybe I need to give Nebraska another chance at some point.
Yeah. Well, that was the cool thing. So most people, a lot of the people who came and did the film had never done anything rural.
Right.
Someone rode a horse for the first time. Yeah. Someone else, we took folks to the feedlot. Oh my gosh. Where the cows were, and we Scott William Winters, who plays the dad, bottle fed a calf for the first time. Aww. Liam Goldsborough, who you may know also from this area, bottle fed a calf for the first time. So we also brought a rural experience to folks who are here. And I think that was the convergence of the different experiences was really incredible. Yeah.
So there will be a Q&A after this special screening of Winters, Nebraska on the 24th. And so there are tickets available. I'll put that link in the show notes. And then people, if they want to continue the conversation with you about this film or about your work, you are Harriet Productions. That's the name of your production company. So we'll pop that into the show notes as well. And anything else that we should know before we wrap it up?
I would say if you are available at all on the 24th to show up at the Tomorrow Theater, it's a beautiful theater. But we will have about half of our cast and crew there. Yeah, and
all amazing people. Really.
There's just
amazing local people. And do you have people coming from Nebraska then?
No, a lot of them came to the Colorado one. But I think that we have one of our actors coming up from California. Nice. But I think not only do you get to see the film, but you get to see the celebration and everything that went into it as well. And I think that's just something that you don't get to see if you just go in to see it in the theaters later on. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being here today, Eric. It's just been wonderful chatting with you. I can't wait to see how this film does and what you do next. All right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to get your tickets for the Portland screening of Winters, Nebraska at the Tomorrow Theater on June 24th. Attend the Q&A, meet Eric, the other filmmakers, and cast in person. You'll find the link in the show notes, along with links to Eric's work. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with your friends. We'd love it if you could leave a 5-star review. Help us connect with more indie film lovers. Would you like to support the podcast by becoming a guest or a sponsor? Reach out at OregonIndieFilm@gmail.com.